My name is Jerry Dorchuk. I'm your host for the Panhandle Political Forum. Thanks for joining us. Early voting, if you're watching this show after the 15th of August, early voting will be underway. Early voting ends August 27th, and primary day is August 30th. Joining me is not really a first-time guest, but it's been a couple of years since she's been here. Some of you may remember her. In fact, if you have ever gotten into any lengthy discussion on topics of interest, I'm sure you will remember her. Karen Schoen, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jerry.
We've been talking about doing this for about 6 or 7 months.
That's true,
and it's finally happened. You originally moved here from New Jersey.
Yes.
And then you just landed in Greenwood. Kind of just give us a little bit of background on that.
Well, I lived in New York and New Jersey the majority of my life, and then in 2000, Mom said, "Why don't you come to Florida?" And I said, "Gee, you know, that's a really good idea." So we moved down to South Florida. When I moved to South Florida, I said, "My goodness, this is just like living in New York and New Jersey." This wasn't the idea that I wanted. I wanted space, and I wanted area, and I wanted my own space. So we took a serious look at North Florida. We were in business. We were developers, and saw the great opportunity to build here. So we moved up here, and unfortunately, we got involved in the Gulf oil spill, which is what prompted me to go back and take a very serious look at what was going on politically. And that's basically how all of this started. I started a radio show with the 5 states that were surrounding the Gulf. We called it Gulf Speaks. And each week we would talk about what the administration was not doing and permitting, not allowing, 85 days of not allowing the spill to be capped, when the people that I was talking to were actually on rigs and knew that it could have been capped within 5 days and cleaned within 2 or 3. So this was a travesty, but it prompted me to start taking a serious look, because I began to realize all of the things that I recognized from New York were happening now nationwide, and that was, we had an administration that absolutely knew nothing and could tell nothing of the truth.
If someone, and we're going to give this during the show, and we're going to be doing this on at least a couple of times a month, maybe more, but we're going to continue this after the election, as we are with some of our other guests and show that we have. And if someone wants to go to Karen Schoen, SCHOEN.com, that's one of your many websites. Karen, if someone wants to call you and talk to you about what we're going to discuss today, or talk to you about any issue, what's the best number to reach you at?
I would say my cell, and that is 954-864-0530.
Okay, great. Let's just talk a little bit before we get into the topic of discussion. It says that Clinton, the latest polls show Clinton up by 8 points over Trump. Weigh in on that.
Well, if I poll Democrats, Clinton is going to be up by 8 points. So it really depends on the poll, and it depends on the questions. And I go back to what just happened in Great Britain. And polls are skewed, just like statistics, just like numbers, and they can come out any way anyone wants them to come out. But I find it very curious that Donald Trump will have an event and draw 10 to 15,000 people, and Hillary will have an event. My friend just called yesterday and said, "My God, we were at an event and less than 100 people, they couldn't even fill the room, so they pushed everybody behind Hillary." So when you have attendance like that, the polls to me don't mean anything.
Yeah, Great Britain didn't see that coming.
No,
did they?
They didn't see that. They didn't pay attention to the people, which is what the problem is. This is a very, very, very important election, and everybody needs to vote, because this is not an election about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This is an election about whether America wants to be Americans and control their own destiny, or whether they want to be thrown in the soup and just be another country in the global sphere of influence.
You know, it says that almost 6 in 10 registered voters are dissatisfied with their choice between Clinton or Trump.
And I can see that because this is not an election. The sad part is a person like Trump comes up once in a very, very short lifetime where a person will take it upon himself to be the messenger of the people. And Trump said in the very beginning, I am not politically correct. Just like I say that also. Well, when you are not politically correct and you are speaking the truth, it goes both ways. So you may not like what he says on the one hand because you love what he says on the other, and he's not politically correct. He's calling out ISIS, he's calling out terrorism, he's calling out the border fence. Well, he's going to turn around and call out a person just as easily because that's the nature of the beast. So we can't have it both ways. We can't say, we want you to be absolutely 100% politically correct, but then don't talk about the wall and talk about immigration. It can't happen that way. So you have to have a bit of give and take. And I always ask everybody in this election, name one law or bill that Donald Trump ever passed that harmed the American people in any way. There wasn't any. So we have that to weigh, but it's really a lesson beyond that. It is a lesson about do Americans want to maintain their freedom and liberty and choice, or do they want a government made up of bureaucrats that they have no allegiance to determine their destiny? One is Americanism, one is globalism, and we have one candidate representing Americanism, Donald Trump, and one candidate representing globalism, Hillary Clinton. So that's the real decision.
You know, I don't know if Donald Trump has passed. I know he hasn't passed any, but he certainly wields influence with money. Money buys votes, money buys power. There's only one law that I can think of adversely that affect an old widow, and I believe it was in New York. Kelo, I think it was the Kelo decision.
Okay, and that was really
Let me just finish. Hang on here.
Sure.
Now,
Go
you
ahead.
did this 2 years ago to me, but we're friends. I
That's
don't want
right.
you to think I'm picking on her, because I'm not. We're friends. We're not adversaries here. I believe it was the Kelo decision. I almost hesitate saying it, but it was an eminent domain where a widow refused to sell.
Okay.
Her.
That was in Atlantic City, and I lived in New Jersey at that time and was very cognizant of what was going on in Atlantic City. Atlantic City was a ghetto. There was no place that was safe in Atlantic City. And it was a shame because as a child I used to love to go there.
The boardwalk.
The boardwalk, that was incredible.
Yep.
And the saltwater taffy and the ocean and everything else. Donald Trump wanted to put a parking lot next to one of the casinos that he was building, and this woman did not want the casino, did not want to sell her land. Well, the difference was, as an independent individual, he went to her and he made her an offer, and she said no. So he made her a bigger offer, and she said no. He made her a bigger offer, and she said no, and he said, I hear you, no is the answer, I will do something else. He never took any land. He never took anything. That's the difference between the government saying, I'm taking, or an individual saying, I'd like to take. And in the bottom line of this, Donald Trump would not have been able to do anything if the new Atlantic City Council members said no. But they did not. They said, here, Donald, go and do it. So he got the government approval to do what he needed to do, and as a result, it didn't work out. Some deals work and some deals don't. But it is a misnomer to think that he didn't try, and as a business person, you have to try.
Sure, certainly you're gonna do that. You're gonna do that. Let's talk about one other thing. Then we want to get into what we're really here for today. A lot of the RNC members, some of the ones who are still not happy that Donald Trump is the nominee, are circulating a petition to try and get Reince Priebus, the chairman, to convene a special meeting to put Trump off the ballot and put somebody else back on. We know that it's not gonna happen, but what's your spin on this?
Well, you have to go past and look at the people who are signing this petition. And we have a name for them. We call them the neocons. They are not conservatives. They are a newly formed, and newly I would say about 60, 70 years old, fraction of the Republican Party who have become the globalists. So they believe in the global ideology and cannot tolerate a person coming in and saying nationalism, because their stage is set for open borders, for a North American Union, and for America to be another country in the soup. So it's not Democrat versus Republican. That's a misnomer. It's globalist versus Americanism. Globalism versus Americanism. And the top of the pyramid, both Democrats and Republicans, are both globalists. So this is the reason why the threat of a Donald Trump candidate is so overpowering to them, and they are literally trying to figure out what to do.
You remember Jeb Bush? He used to be governor here in
Yes,
Florida. Not many people do. But his son, George P. Bush, who is the Texas Land Commissioner, says that we need to unite behind Donald Trump, and we need to elect him president, just basically to block Hillary from being our next president. Why can't, I know ego's involved here, Hillary wins because a lot of the establishment Republicans are not happy they didn't get their way, so they're going to sit it out, or they're going to vote for Gary Johnson. So Hillary wins. I mean, she's within a handful of having the electoral votes locked up if you look at that mathematically. Why can't, what's one or two things, quick, and then we'll get on, what's one or two things that the Republicans could do now that would solidify Donald Trump's winning in November?
They can support his economic policy. They don't have to support him as a personality. What they have to do is focus on the issues. And if they focus on the issues, there is such a major difference between the two. And I think that that is what younger Bush has discovered. And that's really where it's at. Too many people would rather have the status quo than a change. And Donald Trump is offering a real change. And let's be real. The chances of him doing every single thing that he wants to do are
Not
slim
going to
and
happen.
none.
Yeah.
However, with Hillary, we know what we're getting because we're getting 100% of exactly what we have. Nothing will change. It'll get worse because the policies will then be acted upon. What we have with Donald Trump, if he does 20% of what he says he's going to do, the country will be so much further ahead just by having sanity in our economic policies.
Don't hold back your feelings, Karen. Tell me how you really feel. Let's talk about ISIS. Let's talk about national security. You brought up a subject before we, came on. We have a kind of a schedule agenda, so we know what we're talking about here. And when I got your email, I thought, okay, I'll ask this question. Educate me. What does ISIS have to do with slaves in America?
Well, the other day I was reading an article, and one of the chiefs of ISIS said, if ISIS was in control of America and had settled America in the Civil War, America would still be enslaved. And I couldn't believe that I was hearing that, or I was reading that. And I said, I've got to go back, because I was a teacher, and I've got to revisit that time in our history to see what they're talking about and what's going on in school and what's not being taught, so that we now have this understanding of what slavery was all about. Because right now, we don't. And originally, what people don't realize when we go back, when I discovered, is when America was created, if you look at the times of that time, what was going on at that time in our history, we didn't have machines that could go out in the fields. We didn't have machinery we had people power. We had labor. We had physical labor. Well, you settle a piece of property, and the property is huge. You want to grow crops. You have forced labor, which then is slavery. But this is the way labor had been done for years and years and years. There was no change. The kings, as soon as they conquered an area, what was the first thing they did? They plundered, they stole, and they made the people into slaves. And that's how the pyramids got built, and that's how the Roman aqueducts got built, and that was how everything was done, and that was the natural course of business. Was that good or bad? No, it was evil to make anyone a slave, but unfortunately, over thousands of years, that is what was done. The difference at that time was that color was not an issue. Slaves could be black, slaves could be white. And when slaves first came to America, the first group of slaves were black. But as time progressed in the later 1600s and early 1700s, as the British were taking over the Irish, what were they doing? They were plundering, they were stealing, and they were enslaving the Irish. And then they were sending the Irish to America. So we had two groups of people. We had black slaves and we had Irish slaves. And it became a caste system, a class designation of slaves not designated by color. I was reminded as I was reading, I said, oh, I wonder how many people realize who was the first slave and who was the first slave master. And the first slave was a Muslim from Africa who was enslaved by a Muslim from Africa. So the first slave, his name was Caesar, or Caesar, C-A-S-O-R.
John Cassor.
John Cassor. He was a Negro, that was what blacks were called at that time, and he was an indentured servant, and that was really the way they addressed slavery. I'm taking over your property, I'm sending you to America, you owe me X, and you have X number of years, usually between 5 and 7 years, to pay off your debt. And at the end of that debt being paid off, you became a free person. Well, John Cassor was an indentured servant of Anthony Johnson, who was also a Negro African and came to America as an indentured servant.
Both Muslim.
Both Muslim. So I guess Obama was right. The Muslims were in our early history. Not the way we would have liked. However, John Cassor was working for Anthony Johnson and didn't like the terms and the conditions, so he left. And then he went to another gentleman by the name of Robert Parker, and he said, I will finish out my time of servitude with you. Well, Anthony Johnson said, wait a minute, we're not going to allow that to happen. I'm not allowing my laborer to go and work for somebody else and him get the reward of what my laborer is supposed to be doing. So Anthony Johnson sued John Cassor and Robert Parker for the return of his property, and Cassor was considered his property. The judge at that time said to Johnson, well, I agree, Cassor has to go back to you, Parker has to pay you, but the difference was the term. The term was not 7 or 5 or 7 years. The term was lifetime. He had to go back and work for Johnson for lifetime. And that was the first slave in Virginia in America.
This isn't, you're not making this stuff up. I checked. I thought, because I know you well enough to know, you're not going to say something or put it out there unless you can factually back it up. And so and then when I read where the court returned Cassor to Johnson, where he had to work for life, it wasn't just for that period of time.
That's right. And that was the first slave. And I don't think people also realize is that as indentured servants paid off their debt, they were often given land to cultivate because that was how America was growing. Well, there were more black owners, more Negro owners of property who had slaves, both black and white, and no one talks about that at this time. So we focus on the wrong thing instead of on the right thing, which is the history of slavery and why it was not a black-white issue at that time, which I also found very interesting. Because as the two classes, the white, we'll call them the white Irish, and the black Africans were lumped together. They would go to church together, they would participate in gatherings together. Well, what happens when people coalesce and get together? They become friendly and they intermarried. And had this been able to continue, we wouldn't even be having these discussions today. Because in the majority of the countries where slavery, also by the way, I don't think people realize that only 5% of the slaves came to America. The majority of the slaves went to the Iberian Peninsula, which is today Spain and Portugal, and to South America. And the difference was the intermarriage. No one addressed intermarriage in either of those areas. It wasn't until Woodrow Wilson outlawed interracial marriages and segregated the federal government and the military that the color issue became an issue. Because if I'm sitting across the table from my family and it's black and white, I'm not going to have racial issues about that. So it is a whole convoluted story about slavery in America that has been erased from our history that people don't know.
You know, you mentioned that, and just interjecting there real quick, I was told the story. Because I was the youngest of the family, so I wasn't there. But my mother would tell the story that one of my sisters came home from college one time, and she had asked ahead of time if she could bring a friend home with her. She didn't tell us that her friend was of the opposing sex and was a different color. Now follow me, and listeners, just hear the story out before you start shouting and sending me nasty emails. So they showed up, and Mom said, you know, well, there's a room for, and I remember the guy's name now, you know. They welcomed him with open arms into the family, and had dinner, just like we would normally. And then my sister Helen asked Mom and Dad after that weekend, she said, what if I marry this man? And they looked at her and they said, do you love him? She goes, well, I'm just asking you, what if? He said, does he believe in God? They knew he did because they went to church. Everybody went to church. Do you love him? She said, well, I'm not marrying him, but this is just a what if, Mom and Dad. He said, well, if you love him, then yes, but most importantly, does he believe in God? Well, they knew he did because you have interaction, you have a good feeling about people. They didn't give a crap whether you black or white or Chinese or anything. They didn't see the color. We lived on the railroad tracks on the bad part of town, and maybe this was probably the reason my parents had the attitude they did. You'd have hobos, I don't know if they still call them hobos today, but you'd have people of all creeds come knocking on the door wanting some food. Hey, can we sit out here and eat? They would open the door and they'd sit at the table with us. I can remember that as a kid. I mean, it didn't matter.
That's right. And when I grew up in New York City, we had all persuasions of everything. It didn't matter. We viewed the people as people. We view the people as groups, and that is really by design, as a tool to use to divide and conquer.
When did that change? What changed the race? What was the deciding factor?
I would have to say the deciding factor was just prior to the Civil War, when the Republican Party was born as an anti-slavery party, and the Democratic Party did the major push as the slavery party. How many people know that? I don't think they do. But as time progressed, I don't think people realized how many Negroes they were called at that time, and let's be correct in our history. At that time, the blacks were called Negroes. Negro is a race. Black is a color. That's another difference. There are three races. Mongoloid, Negroid, and Caucasoid. And when we say, that makes me crazy when they say, what race are you? And then they give black, white, and other, that's wrong. And I cross out race and write color. Those are the races. Anyway, the Negroes joined the military. They were part of the Revolutionary War. Some even fought in the South. And this was not really a war against North and South. This was a war against slavery and no slavery. And on one side, we had the Democrats who were pushing slavery, and on the other side, we had the Republicans who were the abolitionists. And one of the strongest abolitionists later was an advisor to President Lincoln was Frederick Douglass, who happens to be one of my favorite heroes. And when I was teaching, I always used to put a sentence by Frederick Douglass on the board, because he believed that if a person could not read, they will forever be a slave. And by eliminating our history and watering down our education, the Democratic Party, through time, created an environment that separated people and eliminated their ability to think and read by design. Just look what's going on in our schools today. When you and I went to school, America was in the top 10. Now we can't even break out of the 30 percentile. Our children are graduating, they can't read and write. And that is done on purpose, because if I have to go to somebody else to explain a document, I am now subject to their interpretation. It's no longer my choice.
What do you mean when you have to go to somebody else to explain?
If I buy a house and I can't read the papers that it's written on, how do I know what kind of loan I'm getting? If I go to buy a car and I can't read, if I go to buy anything and I can't read, if I go to a meeting and I can't read, I'm subject to the interpretation of those people who are reading, because they are telling me. And when you read to someone, you can't help but inflect your own personality in there.
So you don't believe that someone has a right to remain ignorant?
Somebody has a right to remain ignorant. I do believe that they do if they choose to. But when it's forced upon you without them knowing about it, that's something different. And that, unfortunately, is what our schools have become today. Going back to what you had asked me before, I believe that the real turning point was President Wilson. Because up until, from the Civil War, the 40 years from the Civil War until Wilson, I guess it was 60, America went through a tremendous amount of integration, interracial marriages. Negroes were in business, they were in government. We had many, many statesmen who were black. They were in all of the professions until Wilson segregated, resegregated, President Wilson, the Democrat, resegregated the military, the government, and was totally against any interracial marriage. And once you make that division, it makes it easier for people to be divided. And this is how the Democratic Party was able to capture the minds of the people, because they kept them ignorant. And we must go back and look at our history. Wilson actually had a showing in the White House where he showed the history of the KKK. The KKK was the terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. Imagine that. So we have a very rich history of eliminating slavery in America, being reintroduced to racial segregation through Democrat Wilson, coupled with Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, it's another favorite, all promoting a change in our history so that people have no idea what our history is about. And it is a shame, criminal, to keep groups of people ignorant for 3 reasons, which is what's being done, and that is money, power, and control. That's what this is all about. It is the power that I can exercise over you if I can control you and push you down. You are so down, you'll give me power. And therefore, once I have the power, I can take the money. So we have all of this interplaying simultaneously while we are thinking in sound bites in segmented areas. What we have to understand is that our history is what dictates our present and our future. And when we don't know our history, we make mistakes. And if you remember Michelle Obama saying we have to change our history, we should go back and look at our textbooks, because they are not a representation of what America was. So people fighting for freedom have no idea what freedom is. What are they fighting for? They have no idea. When we eliminate something, we make the people ignorant, and it becomes very easy for others to manipulate them. And unfortunately, that's what we have today. So I feel that there are 4 very important sentences that I try to leave everybody with. And that is that everything is connected. What happened in the past is what is dictating what's happening today. We have to know our history. Nothing is random. Nothing happens. There's no such thing as coincidences. Everything happens for a reason. Everything has a plan. And as we are now beginning to learn, all of these plans are based on lies.
You know, obviously we can't do this in just one show. You've got, and that's why we're gonna have you come back and do more and more stuff here. I mean, there's some things in here, I'm not questioning what you've written here, but just a couple of things stuck out in my mind. Margaret Sanger in 1925, she was a eugenist.
A eugenist.
Eugenist, I'm sorry. A eugenist who believed in a superior race.
That's right. And if we go back and we look at Nazi Germany, what were they focused on? A superior race. They were breeding to get a superior race. Margaret Sanger believed that she came from a family of 11 children, and she believed that the more children you had, the more poverty you had. She studied the wealthy people and discovered maybe they only had 2 or 3 children, so she equated birth to wealth. Totally ridiculous. And went and then created the group which has today become Planned Parenthood, with the sole purpose of eliminating the inferior race, weeding out those inferior people. Who were those inferior people? High on the priority list were blacks. Second then would be the disabled. And she actually believed that in order to have children, you should be asking permission. Now, if we jump forward to today, our science czar, John Holdren, said on numerous occasions that he felt that it was perfectly fine to put a sterilization into the water, and that people, when they want to have children, should be tested and then given a license to have children. So we're following the same path, but if we don't know what that path is, then we're going to be committing to that.
And that was said 25 years ago, right?
25 years ago, yes. And when asked who were her heroes, Hillary Clinton said Margaret Sanger. Now think about that. If you were a black and you knew the history of Planned Parenthood, how could you support someone who said the hero, my hero, is the creator of Planned Parenthood, whose sole purpose was to exterminate the black race? And they did that through abortion. And here's a good statistic. 500,000 babies are aborted every year by Planned Parenthood. ISIS has killed about 8,000. Look at the difference. Look at the difference. What are we annihilating? And of course, who are the people that are having the abortions? The people in poverty. And unfortunately, a lot of that
I
does
wouldn't say-
focus on the blacks.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, you know, that people in poverty are the only ones having abortion. Maybe, I mean, that you have people who are, it's not just people
Oh,
in
no,
poverty.
no, it isn't. But they are focused mostly in those neighborhoods. I should have, let me rephrase that. The majority of the Planned Parenthood clinics are in the neighborhood, are in the poorer neighborhoods. So their target is obvious.
You know, we've had this, and then we're going to close, because you have a video that kind of condenses all this, and they're going to play. But you know, we had these people who were going into Planned Parenthood and, you know, videoing and capturing all these despicable things that they talked about inside and everything, and you have one side saying it's legit, you have another side saying, well, hey, this was made up, and so you put it out there. So what does the American public, not just the voter, but this touches, abortion touches every person, whether you're a registered voter or not. But what does this come down to our electorate when they get ready to vote? What do they need to look at when they're making a decision, rather than just sitting back and complaining about what's going on?
We have to get past the sound bites. And if you're going to vote for something, you have to be able to ask the right questions about it. Where did it come from? Why is it happening? Don't take anything at face value. We have to go back, and as I mentioned before, capture some of that stolen history, because it's out there. So I believe I would never have an abortion. I believe in life. But I don't believe that I have the right to push that on someone else. They have the right to make their own choices. But I don't think people understand what the end game of some of our choices are. So before we make those choices, we really need to go and investigate which is what we have been not doing. And we have not been doing that by design, because our media and our educational system speaks largely in sound bites. So we are not used to those paragraphs, those essays, those investigative research questions being answered. Fortunately, we live in a time when we have the internet and we have libraries, and most people should be able to read. But if you can't, please call me. I'll be happy to share. The information is there. We just have to be cognizant of it, and we have to make the right decision. And the right decision is not a personality contest. The right decision right now is, does your candidate support your belief? Do you believe in America? Do you want to be able to make your own choices? Or do you want to be controlled by bureaucrats that have no skin in the game and could care less about you, and are there because they want to make money, they want to control you, and they want power over you? So those are the two ideologies that we are facing today in this election. And I take personalities right out of it. I'm not interested. I'm interested in somebody who says, America is exceptional, not America is mediocre. The people of America are exceptional people because they have been given the opportunity to make themselves exceptional, not being told what they can do. And that's a whole other issue. But that's really what this election is about, the direction of America. What direction are we going to go in? And what is it that Ronald Reagan said? He said, freedom is only one generation away from extinction. And that's what we are facing right now. But if you don't understand what freedom is, you're not going to fight for it. So we got to go back and look at our roots and discover what really happened before we are willing to give up that freedom.
Again, Karen, if someone wants to call you, what's the best way to reach you?
The best way to reach me would be my email, which is kbschoen, S-C-H-O-E-N, @bellsouth, one word, .net. And my cell phone is 954-864-0530. Please remember, we live in the country, and if I don't get the message right away, call me back again. I'm not denying any phone calls.
You can also visit her website. She has several different ones. I'll give one out. Karen Schoen, SCHOEN.com. We'll give the other ones out as we talk about each of those specific topics as we have you back again. I'm going to sign off with what I have to say, and then Karen is going to mention a video that is going to be played. But Karen, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to having you come back again. My name is Jerry Dorchuk, for your host of the Panhandle Political Forum. If you have a guest, if you want to come on the show, or if you have something you want to talk about, please call me, 482-5079. The views expressed here are the views of Karen Schoen and Jerry Dorchuk, and not Jim Roberts Sr. Thanks for watching.
The video that you are about to see was created by a friend of mine. His name is Franz Kibro. It can be seen on YouTube, but it is so important because it is factual. He did a tremendous amount of research in order to put together the history of our country and what he calls stolen history. So please go to YouTube, watch our show over and over again, and pay attention to what is real and truthful. We have to stop accepting lies as reality. So please enjoy the video and share it with as many people as possible. Thank you. amazing.
We had Franz on the show, I think, didn't you introduce him
That
to
was
me?
K. Carl Smith, who is the Frederick Douglass Republicans. And he was here.
I'm pretty sure I've met him. I'm pretty sure we had him on.
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, he did a tour of the Panhandle. Yes, that was actually where I met him. We were
Yeah.
on the same speaking tour.
Yeah.
An amazing